In 1978, there were 211,000 registered general aviation aircraft in the United States. Weekend pilots, flying clubs, doctors, teachers, and factory supervisors who owned their own airplane the way their neighbors owned a boat. Today, that number is under 170,000, and it is falling every year, not because of a crash, not because of a scandal, not because of a war or a recession or an act of God. The airports are still there. The sky is still there. The physics of flight hasn't changed. So why are the planes disappearing? The answer isn't the one most aviation channels want to give you, because it makes a lot of powerful people look very bad. It goes back decades, involves lawyers, insurance companies, and regulators, and it explains why a 50-year-old Cessna sitting in a hangar right now costs more than a brand new pickup truck, and nobody is building anything to replace it. If you fly, if you ever wanted to fly, or if you've ever wondered why general aviation feels like it's being slowly strangled from every direction at once, this video is for you. Subscribe before we get into it. This one goes deep. Ask someone why they stopped flying and they'll usually say the same thing. It got too expensive. And then they'll leave it there, as if that explains anything. It doesn't, because the real cost of small plane ownership isn't the number on the price tag, it's everything that comes after. Here's what actually keeping a simple single-engine airplane flying looks like in 2026. Hangar rental runs anywhere from $400 to $1,200 a month depending on where you live. Annual inspection, the FAA mandated top-to-bottom review every airplane must pass every year, runs between $1,500 and $7,000, and that's before anyone finds anything wrong. Avgas, which you cannot substitute with regular fuel, sits around $6 to $8 a gallon at most airports. Insurance on a basic VFR airplane for a private pilot runs $1,500 to $3,000 a year. Engine reserve, the money you set aside every hour you fly to cover the overhaul that is always coming, adds another $20 to $30 per flight hour on top of the fuel. Added up honestly, and a modest single-engine airplane costs $20,000 to $30,000 a year to own before you have gone anywhere interesting or fixed anything unexpected. One commenter put it plainly, what you pay for the airplane, you pay again every year just to keep it flying. That's not a hobby expense, that's a second mortgage. And unlike a house, the airplane doesn't build equity, it builds maintenance logs. This is the number that ends flying careers, not the purchase price, the relentless, recurring, completely predictable cost of keeping something airworthy in a system that was never designed with affordability in mind. Here's the part of this story that the original video missed entirely, and the comments noticed immediately. General aviation didn't get expensive by accident. It got expensive because of what happened in American courtrooms starting in the 1960s and accelerating through the 1970s and 80s. Strict product liability laws meant that an airplane manufacturer could be sued for accidents involving their products decades after those products left the factory. There was no statute of limitations. A Cessna built in 1962 was still a potential lawsuit in 1992 and 2002. And beyond. Juries paid out. Insurance premiums exploded. The cost of liability coverage baked into every new airplane went from roughly $50 per plane in the early 1960s to over $100,000 per plane by the late 1980s. Cessna's own legal team testified that the company was spending more defending liability cases than it was earning in profit on small airplanes, cases they were winning. The legal bills arrived whether the plaintiff prevailed or not. By 1986, Cessna had stopped building single-engine piston aircraft entirely. Piper went bankrupt in 1991. The factories didn't close because nobody wanted airplanes. They closed because building them had become financially irrational. Congress passed the General Aviation Revitalization Act in 1994, which capped manufacturer liability at 18 years per airframe. Cessna restarted production, but the damage was done. A decade of shutdown had eliminated the manufacturing infrastructure, scattered the skilled workforce, and reset the pricing floor at a level ordinary pilots could never justify. The liability bomb didn't just wound the industry, it permanently rearranged it. The average general aviation airplane in the United States is now over 40 years old. Read that again, the average. Which means for every newer Cirrus on the ramp, there are several 1970s Cherokees and Skyhawks pulling that number up. This is not normal for any other consumer product. Cars get replaced, boats get replaced, electronics get replaced on a cycle measured in years. Airplanes do not get replaced because the economics of replacing them stopped working 40 years ago and have never recovered. Every year, a small but steady number of airframes exit the fleet permanently. Accidents, corrosion discovered during an annual that costs more to fix than the airplane is worth, hangar collapses, engines that reach the end of their service life on airframes that can't justify the overhaul cost. Each one that leaves is not replaced by a new certified aircraft, it simply disappears. The mechanics who know how to keep these old airframes flying are aging out alongside the planes themselves. A shop that specializes in 1970s-era Lycoming engines is a shop that depends on mechanics who learned their trade on those engines, which means mechanics who are now in their 60s and 70s. When they retire, that knowledge goes with them. There is no pipeline of young A&P mechanics lining up to specialize in carburetor float levels on a 1968 Cherokee. The fleet is not in decline. It is in slow liquidation, and the math of replacement has never been harder to make work. In 1980, there were roughly 827,000 active pilot certificates in the United States. Today, that number is around 450,000, and a significant portion of those are pilots who fly rarely or not at all. Getting a private pilot license in 2026 costs between $10,000 and $15,000 at a typical flight school, and that assumes no setbacks, no weather delays, no scheduling gaps that force you to repeat lessons. The FAA minimum is 40 flight hours. The national average to pass the check ride is closer to 60 to 70 hours. At $150 to $200 per Hobbs hour in a training aircraft, the numbers add up fast for someone who is also paying rent and student loans. The people who do make it through are increasingly doing so for one reason: the airlines. Professional pilot training is an investment with a calculable return. You build hours, earn ratings, fly regionals at low pay for a few years, and eventually reach a major carrier salary that justifies the outlay. That pipeline makes financial sense. Flying for the love of it, on a middle-class income, with no professional return on the investment, is a harder and harder case to make to yourself, and nearly impossible to make to a partner who is watching the credit card statement. The result is a pilot population that is older, smaller, and increasingly professional rather than recreational. The weekend flyer who owns his own airplane just because he loves to fly is not being replaced. He is aging out, and when he sells or hangs up his headset, that demand for rental aircraft, for fuel, for maintenance, for instruction, goes with him. Nobody in aviation argues against safety. That's not what this is about. What it is about is the cumulative weight of a regulatory system that has grown steadily more complex for 60 years without any corresponding mechanism to simplify it. Every new mandate adds cost. Every airworthiness directive grounds aircraft until compliance is documented. Every logbook discrepancy, missing form, or delayed part can keep an airplane on the ground for weeks or months while the owner pays hangar fees on something they cannot fly. A DSB out compliance, required since 2020, cost owners anywhere from $2,000 to $6,000 per aircraft to retrofit. For an owner flying 50 hours a year in a plane worth $60,000, that is a significant percentage of the asset's value spent on a mandate. For some owners, it was the final calculation that tipped the decision to sell. The FAA updated its Part 23 certification rules in 2017 specifically to reduce the cost and time of bringing new aircraft designs to market. It was a genuine reform. But certification of a new aircraft still takes years and millions of dollars, which means the only manufacturers who can afford it are the ones serving the high end of the market. The affordable trainer that the new rules were supposed to enable has not materialized. The regulatory environment didn't create the crisis, but it has made recovery from it nearly impossible. General aviation does not happen at major airports. It happens at the 5,000 plus smaller public use airports scattered across the country, the ones with a single runway, a fuel pump, a small terminal building, and a row of hangars that have been there since the 1960s. Those airports are under pressure from every direction simultaneously. Land values in growing communities have made airport property attractive for development. Residential neighborhoods that have expanded toward airport boundaries generate noise complaints that translate into political pressure for closure. State and municipal budgets under strain look at airports that serve a few hundred pilots and see an asset that could be monetized differently. When a small airport closes, the aircraft based there don't disappear immediately, but they scatter. Some find hangar space at other fields, some get sold, some get grounded indefinitely because the new field is too far or too expensive. The flying community that formed around that airport, the Saturday morning coffee crowd, the flying club, the local flight school, disperses and rarely reforms. Between 1990 and today, hundreds of public-use airports have closed across the United States. Each closure is local news for a week and then forgotten. The cumulative effect is a general aviation infrastructure that is measurably thinner than it was a generation ago and getting thinner every year. Something interesting is happening at the edges of general aviation. The pilots who would have been priced out entirely are not all quitting. Some of them are going around the system. Ultralight aircraft, single-seat machines weighing under 254 pounds, flying under Part 103, require no license, no medical certificate, no annual inspection, and no registration. They burn regular automotive gasoline. They fold onto a trailer. One commenter in the aviation forums described flying his ultralight-powered parachute for 28 years, storing it in his garage, hauling it on a $200 trailer, and enjoying every minute of it at a fraction of what certified GA costs. The experimental amateur-built category has grown steadily for decades. Builders who spend several years assembling a van's RV kit in their garage end up with a faster, more efficient airplane than most certified alternatives at roughly half the cost. More new experimental aircraft are registered in the United States every year than new factory-built piston planes. Light sport aircraft have carved out their own niche despite the limitations of the Sport Pilot Certificate. And now the FAA's new MOSAIC rules, still working their way through the regulatory process, promise to expand what sport pilots can fly significantly, potentially including older certified aircraft that would qualify under the new standards. The market that certified manufacturers abandoned didn't disappear. It found other ways to exist. This one is harder to quantify and easier to dismiss, which is why it usually gets left out. But talk to anyone who has been involved in general aviation for more than 30 years, and they will say the same thing unprompted. The culture changed. Flying used to carry a certain image: freedom, independence, the ability to go anywhere, on your own schedule, above the traffic and the noise. Aviation magazines sold that image as effectively as car magazines sold the open road. It worked. It brought people in. That image has eroded, partly because the reality of ownership, the costs, the regulations, the maintenance, the weather cancellations collided with the romance too many times, partly because the aviation community itself has not done a particularly good job of making the next generation feel welcome. The average pilot lounge at a small airport is not a place that makes a 25-year-old feel like they belong, and partly because the competition for that sense of freedom and adventure has intensified. Motorcycles, off-road vehicles, sailing, rock climbing, none of them are cheap, but none of them require a medical certificate, an annual inspection, and a minimum of 40 hours of dual instruction before you're allowed to go alone. The emotional case for general aviation was always its greatest asset. The industry has spent 40 years failing to make it. The honest answer is maybe, but not soon, and not easily. Electric aircraft are coming. Pipistrel, Buy Aerospace, and others are developing certified trainers with lower operating costs and simpler power plants that don't require the same expensive overhauls as a Lycoming or Continental. The FAA's MOSAIC rulemaking could open the light sport category wide enough to matter. New manufacturing technologies might eventually reduce the cost of certified airframe production. But the history of general aviation is littered with technologies and regulations that were supposed to fix everything and didn't. LSA was supposed to bring affordable flying back. It helped, but it didn't transform the market. GARA was supposed to restart manufacturing and bring prices down. Production came back. Prices didn't. What would actually change the trajectory isn't a new airplane or a new rule. It's a generation of people who decide that flight is worth the fight, who learn to fly, join clubs, mentor students, advocate loudly, and refuse to let the infrastructure collapse one small airport at a time. The pilots who kept GA alive through the worst decades did it not because the economics were favorable, but because they couldn't imagine not flying. That stubbornness is the only thing that has ever really protected this world. Whether there are enough people left who feel it that deeply is the question nobody in aviation wants to answer out loud.